And it's welcome back to episode 30. Yes, 30 of We Love Algae Data, the Deep Analysis podcast, or if you're recording it the other way, series 4, episode 8. So the August episode of 2025. I'm here. Alan's here again. Hi, Alan.
Hello.
So for those of you who have not sat through any of the previous 30 episodes of this, well done. You've escaped it that long, but we've got you now. Here's the format of the podcast. The important part of the format of the podcast is telling you the format of the podcast. And here's the format of the podcast. Format is 3 topics, always 3 topics, 30 minutes. It's never 30 minutes, but that's the aim. It's good to have an aim. We aim at 30 minutes. We shoot and we miss. We normally overshoot. We very rarely ever undershoot. It's always an overshoot. It's always over 30 minutes. I could, of course, make us close to it by not going through the format each time, but I know you like the format bit. The format bit is the palate cleanser, the bit like that tells you this is the world of rambling that you're about to enjoy for the next 30x minutes. So let's get into it. You'll know from the previous 2 episodes, if you were here for the last two we talked about the new batch of vendor profiles, vendor vignettes, call them whatever you want, that we went through them month on month. In fact, we've been going through them so long that actually while I was on holiday, we published a whole load of them again. So for this month and for next month, we'll be going through each of those new ones again. Many of them are net new names for us to cover, and probably net new names for you. And there's 1 or 2 which are somewhere between people we've covered before and the venerable old favorites that we've always covered. Venerable isn't probably like a compliment, but it's meant to be a compliment. We'll get onto the very venerable later on, maybe in this podcast. But there is a blog which explains all of this that Alan put out when I was off in July, which has got a lovely picture of some different types of heirloom tomatoes. Did you get that the right term, Alan?
They are indeed. They're from my backyard.
Ah, from your backyard.
Yes.
So they're down. They're
was away for a week on vacation, came back, and there they all were. Yeah.
South Philly grown tomatoes.
Yep.
So we're going to go through some of those today. Some next month, but obviously the other thing, of course, to remind you of is the presence of show notes. Show notes will contain all of the links that we're talking about here. So there will be links to all of this in the show notes that will come out at the same time, if not slightly after you're enjoying this podcast, either in video or audio form. So let's get into it. And I've got the first one. So Lattice Flow, again, net new to us, European company. What's interesting, and forgive me if you're au fait with this, but there's kind of a split that's happening between Europe and the US on the management at a state level of AI. The US government currently is going for a very much a hands-off, let AI do what AI will do. Any attempts to legislate AI will only slow down the new economic industrial revolution juggernauts. That's a horrible mixed metaphor that AI is. Europe is taking a different route, and Europe is trying to legislate to try and ensure that there's some governance over how these tools are going to work. Lattice Flow is a company from Europe, it's from Switzerland, and it's very much placed in the sort of governance, risk and compliance operations that organizations who are starting to take on AI have to build within their existing GRC operations. So if you're like a big bank, you'll have a huge GRC department that manages the risk of using all the stuff that your bank uses. And what Lattice Flow does is allow you to build, using their tools, those same kind of GRC controls over AI, whether they be full AI applications or whether it's AI tools that have been built into existing applications. And they do that by helping you manage things like understanding the data profile of data you're putting into it, understanding the profiles of the individual models that you're using, and provide a whole bunch of tools for that. Details, of course, of this are all in the actual vendor vignette, vendor profile, which are available to subscribers. If you're not a subscriber, then get in touch and we can find a way of making you a subscriber. You have to pay for that, probably. Yeah, definitely you have to pay for that. It's how we keep the lights on. Yeah, so if you'd like to know a little bit more about that, you can dig into more detail. There's a little bit more information, of course, inside the article that we were talking about that introduces it. I think this area of which you kind of, you can see as secondary tooling, but really it's all part of the framework that enables AI to work safely in your organization, is something that we're going to be seeing a lot more of. And that's why when I first heard of this organization and first started talking to them, I wanted to make sure that we wrote something about them, because it's the first, it's not the first one that exists, but it's the first one that we've covered. But I think it's an area where, not just for, you know, the traditional heavily regulated industries, all industries are regulated to one degree or not, whether in Europe or the US, there are still operating regulations you have to work within, and making sure that you are able to box AI in such a way that it can do all the exciting stuff it promises to do without doing all the terrible things it could do if it's not controlled properly, and presenting you with the tools that allow you to make informed choices about its risk, I think are really important. I don't want to label that one. Let's go to the next one, Alan, and Highland.
And Highland, which is a sort of completely different story, isn't it?
It is.
This flow. I will pick you up on something you said there. Everything is regulated. I'm going to get myself into trouble now. But here in the US, we're moving to a point where regulation seems to be an option. But let's not go too deep into that one. But Highland, who works with many regulated companies. Highland's been around a long time, and they're an absolutely fascinating company. And I say that because, in truth, they were perfectly good and interesting enough company, but it's this past year that they've become particularly interesting with basically a complete sweep of senior management, a new CEO, all new C's, if that makes sense, and a brand new strategy. And it is really, it's worth a read, this one, not just because I wrote it. It's worth a read because it is actually less about the technology and more about the strategy. And, you know, it's just, if I can summarize it sort of pretty quickly, the strategy which has been put out by Highland is that your stuff is everywhere. That's okay. I mean, it would be great if you moved it and put it in the cloud, put it in this, put it in that, but it's fine. Leave it where it is, and we'll layer on, to your point, a sort of a governed and accessible platform so that you can start doing stuff with AI. Doesn't sound much, but it's actually a big deal. It's a big deal, because getting people to move off old repositories is an absolute nightmare.
And wouldn't it be fair to say that Highland's customer profile in general, and this isn't a criticism, are more traditional, more conservative industries?
Definitely more conservative, yes, they are. And yeah, I mean, they are, and rightly so, if that makes sense. I mean, in healthcare, in government, in higher education, whatever. Yeah, I mean, they are risk averse. Yeah. And so this is actually, I mean, hey, they're going to have to actually pull it off. But the signs so far are pretty positive. But for a company like Highland that's been around for a very long time, it's a massive turn for them. But as I say, we had a actually, after writing this, we had a sort of business update briefing as another analyst, and so far so good. And it's a good. The reason I think this is an interesting read, I think this stuff here, I think what they're doing is good for everybody to look at. Yeah. Cool.
Okay. Well, Highland, again, for subscribers, it's available in your subscriber bit where all the stuff is. I don't know what it's called. It's in the thing. Also in the thing is Physons, which is another net new to us and probably net new to you. Probably if you come to us for IDP and IDP only, Physon is one interesting one for you, because it isn't IDP, but it's covering a highly sort of similar kind of area. So what Physon do is document processing on top of existing high volume document heavy workflows, and they've been focused very much around Pega. In fact, there are a lot of their customers are Pega customers. Pega are an investor in Physon, unsurprisingly, and they started their life in know your customer, so KWP kind of workflows, so ensuring that documents which are supplied as part of know your customer checks, so things like driving licenses and birth certificates and other stuff, meets the requirements, meets the quality gates that you'd need to have a compliant KYP process. But over time, they've broadened that out. And now for any process that requires document support, so not just KYP, but also things like, and I think if you know even a little bit about how, say, the US healthcare system operates, there's an awful lot of documents that pass from one place to another to ensure that things happen in a million different document formats, and potentially in all sorts of different languages as well. FISA can cover that. So it's an interesting solution that they use, that they've developed in-house. It's not a black box. It's not a plugin, and it works. It's very much a kind of a transparent system with kind of a decent degree of observability, but it allows you, for argument's sake, to plug in multiple LMMs into a single document processing operation. So if you know, like on a particular a document, that this document block is handled better by model X, and this document block is handled by model Y, you can build hybridized models to get a better output result from, you know, typical documents that you work with. Obviously, there's upfront effort involved in doing that, but you end up with a higher quality result out, and therefore probably a much faster throughput of process. And ultimately, these kind of document processes things live or die really by how successful, reliable, and efficient they are in terms of supporting the kind of underlying process.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense, Alan?
Yeah, sort of.
Yeah, sort of. Well, if you want to give me more than yes, sort of, read the VV.
Sign up, become a customer, read it.
Become a customer. You're getting quite salesy. We're almost making an effort to try and get people to buy things here.
Listen, you know, I mean, just on that point, I mean, we talk to everybody. Somebody contacted me on LinkedIn just yesterday from Brazil, and I just pinged them back as I would. Like, oh, this is my email address, let's set up a briefing. Yeah. And they were like, oh, this is amazing. And you get the feeling they've been reaching out to a lot of analysts who've just simply ignored them. So we'll talk to everybody, but yes, we do have to make a living.
Yeah,
I know. I had time and effort and money into this research. So yes, unfortunately.
I had a fascinating briefing yesterday with a relatively recent startup from Singapore, who operate in Singapore and Southern Africa. They're just moving into the US. Fascinating thing, which fingers crossed they'll be writing about. So it's not just the sort of more obvious venerable vendors in our space that we talk about. It's our whole variety from.
And if you're a technology vendor and you haven't briefed us and you've got, I mean, here's the twist, right? Have you got something interesting to tell us? That's the big thing, right? Are you actually doing something interesting? If you are, hey, we'll have a chat, man. That's easy as that.
And if you want to have, if you're watching or listening to this and you think, well, I've not even looked, then one, well, come on, what's the matter with you? What are you spending your time doing? But secondarily, I'll forgive you. You can go to the website, the deepanalysis.net. And if you have a look through the section called vendor vignettes, you can have a search through and you can see a kind of pen picture of each of the ones there. So at least if you're not even a subscriber, you're thinking about getting on board, you can see the full estate, the 3-figure numbers of vendor vignettes which are out there, which you can read at your leisure once you're a subscriber. So that's it for this time of topic. Look surprised, because next month more of these. In fact, we've gone for a little bit of a fallow period at the end of last year, the beginning of this year, when we didn't publish a huge amount. All of a sudden, lots of exciting things have come across our desks, and the result is there's lots of them, which is really good. Next, changes at OpenText. Yeah, so this only happened this week, which is probably by the time you watched it last week. So it happened like 11th or 12th of August. Alan, you wrote a blog post, which of course will be linked to in the show notes. We'll come back to that in a little bit, as did Dan, which we'll mention in a couple of moments' time. But let's just have a look at the press release. It came out on the so before the market opened, as all publicly traded companies have to make these announcements either before or after business. This came out at 7 a.m. on the 11th. That OpenText were replacing their CEO. If we look at that press release, there's two kind of important bits of it, and I put them into highlights on the screen. The OpenText board informed Mark J. Barrenechea of his transition from his role as CEO, effective immediately, which is basically they canned him. So that's interesting because it wasn't a transition. It wasn't Mark is stepping down, Mark is transitioning to a new role, Mark is becoming chairman, Mark is gone. The second part, which I've highlighted out, and we're going to talk about these in a moment, is that OpenText today also announced it will continue to work with its financial advisors to explore portfolio shaping opportunities, which is a hell of a euphemism. That's my words, that's not in the press release. Portfolio shaping opportunities that enhance focus on the company's core information management for AI business and to deliver long-term shareholder return. So things are going to happen to the structure of the company, and they're foreshadowing that, and they have engaged what is referred to as financial advisors on that process. So, Alan, talk us through this a little bit. Give us a little bit of context about OpenText briefly, why this is important and maybe why now.
Yeah, I mean, so OpenText is realistically one of the biggest players in our industry. I'm blanking on what their revenue is. It's over 5 billion, isn't it? I think it's higher than that now. Anyway, they're a big player. It's as simple as that. But they've been around a long time. But realistically, they have openly had they claim they were sort of essentially a private equity firm, which, if you don't know what a private equity firm is, they buy companies and hopefully do something good with them and sell them off at a higher price. That's sort of the basic model. Yeah, OpenText didn't sell them off though. They just bought them. And they bought a lot of companies. I mean, really staggering amount. And with each company, it came in a staggering amount of products. I mean, maybe with some acquisitions, it was one product. With some acquisitions, like the Micro Focus acquisition a year or two back, it brought in a vast portfolio. So, I mean,
oh, and in that case, to be fair to them, they did sell some of the Micro Focus.
They sold the hardware division of it.
Yeah, which is, as I said, unusual. In fact, I think we even you wrote something at the time to point out how unusual it was, because they were good at filling their lot full of stuff.
The first time they ever did it. Yeah, so the best of my knowledge was the first time they ever did it. The reality is they've got, this is not an exaggeration, they have, and I'm not going to put a number on it because nobody seems to be able to put a number on it, 1,000+ products, right? And so, and why did they do that? Well, they bought companies that were in trouble, frankly, right? And they cut costs and got maintenance fees. And let's be honest, it was a very good business model financially for a long time. But in this world of startups popping up, not just popping up, but doing really quite sophisticated things very, very quickly in this age of no code and AI and whatever's, right? That's not a sustainable model anymore. So they've made a decision, and we don't know whether they're going to say, oh, well, I tell you what, let's take all the stuff we have in legal, for example, which is quite a lot of products, and we'll sell that to another private equity company, or we'll sell it to a big law software, legal software company. We don't know whether they'll do it by vertical or they'll just go through. We don't know. Well, they're going to sell stuff off. They've made that out.
The expectation is, let's because our expectation, even though there's nothing, we have no inside track to confirm it, and there's nothing in the press that says it. We are expecting OpenText to either sell assets or to restructure itself as separate companies, which is another option as a part of this action, right?
Or find a buyer for the whole company.
Or find a buyer for the whole company.
I think that will be difficult.
So just to give you the full, but Alan has covered OpenText for a long time. I was acquired by OpenText. Dan was acquired by OpenText. And all three of us have connections here. I've been an OpenText employee, although not for 13 years. Dan was an OpenText employee, or not for longer, both of which were acquired. So we all have different experiences. In my case, almost entirely positive, actually, of working at OpenText or working with OpenText. So it's I think what makes it a little bit different between, and I say this as the only analyst who hasn't written a blog post about this, is that there are companies, software companies, who are a portfolio of products, and they run all of their products entirely separately, right? That's a way of working. OpenText didn't do that. OpenText will buy companies and then make some attempt to integrate them into other lines. So they were always bought with some kind of existing product strategy or synergy with them. So in order to break those apart, it's not just a case of taking something off the shelf and passing it to another PE company. It's likely to be more complex than that, which makes me wonder whether the unwinding of chunks of, let's say, of IBM software division might be a model that you will see for OpenText, rather than, it was easy with that Micro Focus stuff because they could take that chunk because it hadn't been integrated with the rest of the business, because there was no rest of the business to be integrated in. If you were to take out, Documentum and Vignette, for argument's sake, as a separate thing, you would argue how much value those individual parts would have. It's their integration to the rest of the suite, which is probably their ongoing value, which makes it, I guess, a longer challenge to unpick this.
Yeah, I mean, so over the past decade, I guess, OpenText did. So look, the key thing here is, and this has been stated in this press release, they want to get back to what they do best, right? Which is information management. Fair enough. So what doesn't neatly fall under that category? Well, for one, is the business network stuff, which is substantial, and I could imagine there would be a willing buyer for that. I can imagine, I don't know, right? You could have that. Then the other, so they bought the business network stuff, which is like retail transactions and blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And then they bought a bunch of security companies.
They did. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, speculating here, but that could well be something they get rid of, because they're not a security company. Information management needs to be secure, but there's, so I mean, I don't think they know yet either. I mean, this has just happened. It was sort of a weekend, this happened over the weekend essentially, and the press release now on Monday morning. They don't have a new CEO, they have an interim. Tom Jenkins, who was the CEO, is now leading that sort of transition.
Although he hasn't been the CEO for quite a long time. That's
no, not a very long time, but he's always been involved at the board level. So I think, to be fair, I don't know that they know, right? But I think it's in here, and it says it, that there will be, you can virtually guarantee it, they will be selling off some chunks. And what for me at least is interesting is they will sunset some stuff. They've never done that.
No.
And they've never done that.
I think something that's maybe not understood outside people who are close to OpenText is a Canadian software company, and it is quite important, not just to the local economy of Waterloo, but also in terms of it's probably the premier. Well, Shopify has probably taken that on, but they were the premier Canadian software company. So there is a certain amount of pressure on OpenText for assets to remain Canadian, and for OpenText at least not to appear much smaller than it was. The sort of golden child was Nortel, and then it was RIM, and then it was OpenText for a bit, and now it's Shopify, which is worth significantly more. But there is a certain level of national prestige associated with it, which is another factor which wouldn't happen in the US, for argument's sake.
I believe it is I might be wrong on this, but in IT terms, it's certainly in the top 4 companies in Canada. I mean, it's a big deal, and a lot of their business, by the way, is in Canada. Canadian government pretty much runs on OpenText.
Yeah. So that's another pressure on that decision-making process. But we have to wait and see how that plays out. I know one of the things we're banned from saying is only time will tell, and that's right, because
But in this case, nobody actually knows.
In this case, we've given you what we know and what we're speculating, and that's going to count. That's going to count as the latest analysis right now. We will come back to this as we learn more. If you're interested in this specifically from an IDP perspective, of which, of course, through Captaris, which is one of the companies that OpenText acquired over the years, which is big in capture. Dan's written a specific blog post, link in the show notes, you know this, called OpenText Flies a New Flight Path, which talks about specifically where OpenText have got to on that type of product. Now, IDP is quite hot. There'll be more of that next month because Dan's on next month, and it's going to be IDP, IDP, IDP. But IDP is quite hot, so again, that's another area where you could see some interest, external interest in those assets, because that's kind of a hot thing right now. So, last topic for today: pragmatism and solutionism. So, just before I took my holiday in July, I keep a list of topics that I'm going to write about for blog posts. And then when I think, what should I write about this month? I take one off the list. And sometimes those things come off the list after like 3 days, and sometimes they're there for 3 months. And this is one that I've been hanging around, and I wanted to make sure I covered it off before I went away. Because agents, autonomy, and automation, I was getting quite annoyed with the use of the word autonomy in relation to AI agents. Because the word autonomy was being kind of like dandied around like it was the ultimate end game for agents inside enterprise. And I wholeheartedly disagree, on the basis that for real autonomy, you need self-governance and self-determination. No worker inside any organization has either of those in their entirety, and nor would you want them to have that in there. You know, there's an awful lot of hokum that's written about, you know, the new industrial age, and you know, agents are changing the world, etc. They're not. They might in some ways, but it's less likely that they will. But let's think seriously about what we're actually trying to achieve here. And I kind of said what I think right now is the kind of the sort of two paths we're seeing for agents and agent-like technology, because as we know, as we discussed before, what is an agent? Well, I really can't be bothered to try and explain that anymore. You know what? It doesn't matter. An agent is what it says it is, or what the company's saying it is. But what I'm saying here is there's two large schools of thought. There are the generalized agents. Now, these are the ones which seem to be very much being pushed towards consumers. So the ones that you are maybe, you know, seeing friends and family playing with, and this would include, to a large extent, ChatGPT, which is, there is a generalized agent that can have a go at anything, you know, and that means it gives you a certain degree of quality. However, if I was going in for an operation, I wouldn't want to see someone pulled off the bench and went, yeah, I'll have a go at it. I've read a little bit about it. I'll have a go at that brain operation. I'm sure it will be fine. Generally, inside an organization, we want something a bit more focused, a bit more specialist. And that's why I talk about this. There's a second group, which is the focused agents, and those which have a more tight degree of autonomy, where they have carefully determined start points and end points. They're self-directed to a degree within those start points and end points, again, within other boundaries that you have. So we know, because as we discussed before, you know, virtually all business processes are deterministic. We know the likely inputs, we know the desired outputs. Generally speaking, we have an idea about the best ways to go from one point to the other, and we can know that, and we can measure it. Agents may be able to do that faster. They may be able to find some elements which are shorter, but realistically, we want things to operate within those parameters. And that's the area within enterprises where we are, well, frankly, already seeing those things, because you don't necessarily need to be using agent technology in its entirety to do that. You can use agent on top of, and we're seeing, you know, since we saw, you know, robot process automation, we're now seeing, you know, agent process automation, which is, you know, agents adding a little bit of smarts on top of what was previously possible with RPA, as being a deployable now technology in a way that an awful lot of stuff that's talked about our agents is deployable eventually. When is that? Yeah, well, we don't really know yet, but definitely, it's definitely happening. I'm going to stop, Alan. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's well, I'm going to just take it in a slightly different direction.
Please
in
do.
the sense that I think what's really interesting, and I was having this, no, I shouldn't say who. I had this conversation with a senior person at a big company anyway, the other day.
Mm-hmm.
And I was saying, you know, and they, by the way, there was no disagreement. AI agents, it's the terminology and the expectations are table stakes now.
Mm-hmm.
You know, oh, we've got AI. Oh, we're powered by AI. Oh, this is an agentic something or other.
It's AI native, Alan, is what it is.
It's AI native. There's another one. It's noise.
Yep.
It's absolute noise.
Yep.
And what people need to, because we're not dissing agentic technology. The technology is very clever, but what does it do? Right. So you were saying there about, you know, it has a defined start and it has a defined end. Absolutely. Okay. Which defined start, which defined end? How is this actually going to deliver business value?
Mm-hmm.
And it's starting to happen, to be fair. It is starting to happen. You are starting to now see products and companies come to the market fixing this one thing that needs fixing.
Yeah.
Where I would differ a little bit from you is that you're right, by the way. So I'm not actually disagreeing with you.
Well, that's fine. You're fine.
This is one of the problems at the moment. People can't get out of their head the traditional process, the steps in a process. Those are the steps in a process to process an invoice, to I don't know, fulfill an order, whatever. Well, those are the steps that have always been there. There
Mm-hmm.
is the potential with agentic AI to say, hold on, you've asked me, you've given me this data, and this is what you want me to produce, but I've got a completely different way of doing it.
Mm-hmm.
It's faster, quicker, less messy, and more accurate. That's hard for people to accept. And so I think we're reaching this sort of crossroads in the sense that the technology, we say this a lot of the time, but it's true. The technology is way ahead of the customers and their ability to deploy it at the moment.
It always is.
And it always is. And I think one of the big things here, though, and I'm not totally convinced it'll ever change, we need new ways to analyze and think and reframe and reimagine how businesses work at a high level, but actually how this job is done at a micro level. And I don't see that happening.
Well, I mean, to be fair, that's kind of what when we positive work intelligence
Mm-hmm.
three years ago, that's what we were talking about there. And you know, I commend anybody who's watching or listening who's actually read some of the work intelligence research, because one, it's good, but it's quite dense.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of interesting stuff in there about how you do start to reframe and reformat work. And work intelligence is couched on being, I used the phrase in air quotes, AI native, i.e. AI has always been an equal partner in work intelligence, particularly over things like task and process mining, where the end goal was, hey, here's the task, here's the process, this is how it's being operated today, here are the ways in which it could be done better. And that's always been the goal of that, is to find refinements, improvements, ways to make things more, I'm going to say the E word, more efficient.
You know, I knew that word was coming.
And you knew that word was coming up.
That's a word that should be banned, by the way.
Yeah, sure.
It's everything makes something more efficient. How? What exactly? How is it more efficient?
So efficiency being defined likely by the cost of operation of the transaction.
Yeah.
That being the primary goal for most organisations taking this on.
Yeah, but you see, if we take sort of agents in down space of IDP, right,
Mm-hmm.
and the cliched thing is invoice processing, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, so I can process this invoice quicker. I don't want it processed quick. I'm not going to pay the thing for 3 months anyway.
Well, there's that.
No, but I mean, you know what I mean? When you get down to it at brass tacks level, like, I don't care.
Yeah. So efficiency doesn't, but efficiency doesn't always mean speed.
No, it can be, but yeah, no. So my point is the term efficiency. Have we ever had a briefing with anybody in all the years we've worked together where they haven't used the word efficiency?
No,
I'm pretty sure there hasn't been one. So what I'm saying is,
yep.
Tell me exactly, specifically, how. Where is this cost saving? Where is this benefit?
And then it becomes easier for those solutions that you talked about earlier on, which take something, define something specific, and talk about how that specific. And Bison would be a good example, actually, if you're looking to read some research on someone who does something specific, because they're not talking about efficiency in a generic way. They're saying this thing, this process that you have to do, we know how that works. It used to work this way, it now works that way, and the delta between them is this, right? So the more specific you are, the easier it is to define, not efficiency in a kind of vapid sense, but in a very specific sense, because we know where the likely costs are, and we know what the time pressures or accuracy pressures that define its success or failure are, and therefore that's where we're having our transformative AI effects on it, if you like.
Yeah, but I guess what I'm putting out there is just sort of to any technology vendor, any systems integrator, anybody in this industry that sort of sells technology and services. Stop it. Get focused, and also be realistic. There are things where I'm sure you can bring great efficiency, but nobody actually cares. It's not a high priority for them. There are other areas where nobody's doing anything, and those are high priority. Anyway, blah 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 blah. My point is, I think, and we go back to OpenText, it goes back to Highland, right? Where is our industry going? And our industry, I believe, I think the writing's not only on the wall, I think we're starting to see it happen, is going to get more industry specific. It's going to get more process specific. It's going to get more specific. You can't just sell a generic document management system. You can't just sell a generic agentic AI. Nobody wants them.
So your blog post, the seductive dangers of solutionistic narratives in AI, I will put links in the show notes. I'd like to talk about it, but we can't, because we are way over time this month, even more than usual. You don't normally get this anxious tone at this stage going, oh, I just looked at the clock, we're way over. So okay. we will allow people to come. We'll return to this on our next conversation. That's it from us this time. Next time, 3 topics, way over 30 minutes to discuss them in, although we'll try and keep to 30. Thanks again for your insight and knowledge, Alan.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching or listening, and join us next time. Dan and I will be getting deep into IDP yet again. Thank you very much. See you soon.
Bye.